Tonight, I'm really pleased to present this evening of 3 documentaries, all of which happily fell in my lap this year, and I thought each in its own way shined a light on and gave visibility to the disability community, which is the largest minority in the world, if you didn't know, but one that could benefit from greater representation. And just the other day on Facebook, someone was sharing an article from Teen Vogue, which, if you're not familiar with Teen Vogue, it's like our bastion of great journalism recently. That's actually a true statement. And this young woman named Robin Lambert, who lives with cerebral palsy, she said, she had a really great quote. She said, "We want to be seen. It's validating to see someone who looks like you on screen, on a billboard, or in a magazine. Unfortunately, this rarely happens for disabled people. But if we have representation, disability will be normalized and negative attitudes like fear and bias can be shifted. While the industry is slowly getting more representative, there is more work to be done. Still, I'm optimistic." I'm optimistic as well, especially since more and more films created by SVA alumni that focus on those living with disabilities, whether they be visible or invisible, have been created in recent years. Last year, as part of After School Special, we showed the film Trans Fatty Lives by a filmmaker named, I think it was Patrick McDonald, and he has ALS, and he was here doing a Q&A last year, and is just, he's an incredibly hilarious, terrific human being, and it was so great to show that work, and so great to show these documentaries tonight. The 3 films you'll see, each by SVA alumni, there's 2 short films, The Blind Scene by David Snider, and We Will Ride by Anelisa Garfunkel, and those are both being given their theatrical premieres this evening, meaning it's the first time they've been shown on a big screen in a cinema. And then the feature documentary, Tin Soldiers, by Ben Duffy and Michael J. Sassano, both of whom are also SVA alumni, is having its New York premiere tonight. So it has been screened elsewhere, but this is its New York City premiere, so we're really excited to show those films. All 4 people I mentioned, or 3 of the 4 people I mentioned, are here this evening, save Michael Sassano, who gives his regrets as he is shooting a film abroad. Quickly, I want to introduce each of the filmmakers. David Snider is a documentary photographer and filmmaker based in Washington, D.C. His primary focus has been stories about the blind community and their effective adaptation to the sighted world. David's photography has been published by the Washington Post, New York Times, and Time magazine. His videos have been broadcast on NBC News, ABC News, National Geographic, HBO, and Al Jazeera English. David's the executive producer of the Photography Channel website at photographychannel.tv. Anelisa Garfunkel is a writer, filmmaker, and educator based here in New York. Her career as a storyteller began over 15 years ago, making educational films on the tiny island of Pohnpei. Is that right? Okay. In the Federated States of Micronesia. Since then, she has written, directed, and produced television, documentaries, web series, features, and short films in the U.S. and abroad. Her work is screened in festivals, exhibitions, and on TV screens around the world. Her documentaries about disability, 100 Steps, and We Will Ride are often used to teach disability rights and accessibility in university classrooms and advocacy organizations. Anelisa has a BS in journalism from Boston University and an MFA in visual storytelling from SVA. Anelisa's stories are born from a life spent exploring climbing, diving, and adventuring around the world. Anelisa didn't put this in her bio, but she's also the director of operations for the school's MPS directing program. And finally, Ben Duffy is a 28-year-old filmmaker who started in film by making skate videos at the age of 13. Since then, he has independently produced 8 documentaries, 4 of them which are feature-length, and is about halfway done with his new feature-length doc, which I hope he'll tell us about during this interview.
Hi, everyone. I'd like to thank you guys all again for coming tonight, and also stay for the panel. I'm very excited for this panel discussion. Earlier last week, I watched all 3 amazing film, and I was so touched, and I just gotta say I'm honored to be your moderator today. So without further ado, my first question would be, what made you come to SVA?
I'll go first. I was obsessed with photography since I was a child, and assessing all the art schools in New York, I decided that SVA was the best one. I was correct. I visited the campus, and I was 17 years old. So yeah, I was 17 when I moved to Manhattan, and and went off from there. Yeah.
Still the best today.
I worked here, so, but I did actually take the job because I saw the visual narrative program, and I thought that maybe if I stayed here for a while, that I would go into that program. So it was sort of, I don't know which came first, but that's why.
Well, I came here for some sort of orientation in my senior year of high school, and the doors in the building were purple, and purple is my favorite color, so I decided to come to this school.
Good choice.
So that's why my shoes are purple, too. So, yeah, and I knew it was a great school from the orientation, too, but it was really the purple doors that sealed the deal.
Thank you. My next question will be, a lot of teachers always say that students are protected by the school, but how do you think SVA prepare you for the outside world and the life after graduation?
I graduated in 1992, and I didn't take any business courses. So honestly, I wasn't very well prepared to be to support myself or to be a business person. But I had a supreme level of arrogance that I could do really well, and so I went forward and worked really hard, and I managed to scrape by for many years. And but I left SVA with a mountain of inspiration and commitment to my initiative to be an artist and to be independent. And I figured out the business part later. You can learn that stuff anywhere, but what I needed from SVA was I still carry it in me to be creative.
Thank you.
Well, before I came to SBA, I'd been working as a filmmaker for like 15 years, and I think that the program that I was in was not a film program. It was a storytelling program, a visual storytelling program. So for me, I think it did a really great job of taking my work to the next level and teaching me how to get my work out there in a way that I hadn't previously done. So I think SVA in general, and specifically the program, the visual narrative program, was really helpful in giving me the tools I needed to not just make art, but also put my work out there and get people to see it as art or as to hire me to do work. But there's a lot of in between making art and actually making money at it. And I think that there was a lot of emphasis put on balancing those two things.
So the question was how it got prepared. SVA prepared us for outside SVA, after SVA.
Yes.
Well, my freshman year at SVA, I had a teacher named Manny Kirshheimer, and I had only watched like maybe 2 documentaries in my life before I entered his class, and he showed me his documentaries. He showed the whole class, and I was just so in love with the work that he did, and just loved that guy so much. And that was a huge inspiration to me to make documentaries in the first place. But I came into SVA like being pretty much like a full-blown 17-year-old narcissist, and I made a short film, like a short 2-minute film, and all I had made before that was skate videos, and he tore apart that 2-minute film like I've never been tore apart with anything in my life. Like, he just hated it, all 120 seconds of it, and it was like the best thing that ever happened to me. And I actually, don't worry, I came back, but I dropped out after that freshman year, and I moved to California, made my first feature-length documentary, and still to this day, it's by far my most successful documentary. And I came back to SVA, so it's a cool question because I have like two different perspectives. One is like that 18-year-old, and then one when I was 22 and I came back. And so I came back to school, and I started to really like appreciate the people that I was going to school with, you know, not just appreciating myself, and or just like this guy that I put on a pedestal, which he's great, but you know, and so you know, it was a beautiful thing to gain so much inspiration from my fellow filmmakers and friends that I went to school with, and I don't know. I think just seeing how much somebody my age like could be so turned on by like the work that I was doing, and also showing them how much I appreciated the work they were doing, that got me prepared for the real world, because it, you know, in the real world it's a two-way street. You know, you gotta get love, but you also gotta show love. You know, and that's a big part of like where I stand in filmmaking. You know, so that I owe that to SVA for sure.
Thank you for the great story. So my next question is, connecting with the question how SVA prepare you, one of the biggest experience a student at SVA will have is the thesis project. And everyone has a crazy thesis story. And would you like to share what's your thesis project was?
What is the Seasons project?
Thesis.
Oh, thesis.
Yes,
Excuse me.
I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah. I spent my thesis photographing private backyards and community gardens in the Lower East Side and Alphabet City. I committed my whole year to, while I was here at SVA, in class and on site in New York, just documenting in color slides, but then I'd go back to DC and photograph my parents during vacations and occasionally throughout the year to continue my documentary of their life. So I had a double track, but my thesis about community gardens, I created this huge portfolio, and I brought it to the New York Times, and I brought it to an editor, a writer who was specializing in stories about that community. It was loaded with information and details and people I'd contacted with, and all my photography had notes and everything. They held on to it for about a month, and towards the end of this was just before my thesis was really finished, they held on to it for a month. They gave it back to me and said, Dave, thanks, but I think we'll pass on it. And so about a month later, it showed up in the New York Times, all photographed by a staff photographer who went to all the same places that I had photographed. So it sort of ripped my guts out. That's my thesis story. But when I look at those chromes, that art that I created was beautiful, and I still have it, but it's still contaminated. But that was, 25 years ago. I've forgiven them since they published me twice last year in a satisfying fashion.
Thank you.
I don't have a story like that. My thesis was not a film. It was a book, an illustrated children's book, I call it like a futuristic folktale. And it nearly killed me, but it's done, and I'm very proud of it. No good stories to go with it.
I got a story. Well, my senior thesis was 18 minutes. It was an 18-minute part of my third feature-length documentary, which was an hour and 57 minutes, and I didn't want to show that in the Dusties, which is the SVA Thesis Film Festival, because I was so, I don't know, it's like a personal story, and I just wasn't ready to show like that. But the 18-minute segment that I did show was about an ex-professional skateboarder, retired professional skateboarder that I lived with for a little while in California. He was still, is a dear friend of mine, and still a dear friend of mine. And he got caught in Ohio with 8 pounds of weed driving to California, and he got arrested. His wife almost got deported. He had to raise like $110,000 and like by a certain date, or else he'd be going to jail for 5 years. So he raised that money in 3 days by selling weed, and his wife didn't get deported, and he went to jail for 3 months. But before he went to jail, he moved to a house in the Mojave Desert, which like has an 8-mile driveway, has no address, and has no like water supply. So I went out there. I went out there like 3 times in my life. They were all awesome. Mojave Desert is a trip for sure. And we had a good story of like we went to go steal water, which is a full-blown felony. I didn't really realize that at the time. And so, you know, I got into this big water tanker truck that he had, and I filmed him stealing the water, and then the brakes on this water tanker from like the 50s like gave out, so we were like cruising. I was filming him, and the brakes gave out, and then I jumped out of the moving truck, and continued to film. I got into this other car from his friend that was driving behind us, so I can continue filming. That's the thesis, yeah. So that's it.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Okay, now going into your amazing films, I would like to for you to share with us what was your inspiration, or how did you find this project, or how the project finds you?
I've been photographing my family and my parents casually, intimately since I was a child, but my father confided in me a couple of years before I graduated, while I was still in the middle of school here at SVA. He said that he was profoundly unhappy in his marriage with my mother, and he was considering leaving home at some point in the future. And it was a very confidential conversation, but I just sat on it, and I said to myself, well, okay, I'm aware that I am in a family with blind parents, and I'm aware that there's no other photographer who did a documentary like what I had the potential to do with my family, and so I made it. And so I just hoped for the best with my parents' marriage, and explored doing a documentary, not a picture essay, a photo essay. Because my photos aren't really, there's no really beginning, middle, and end. It's just a profile of their life and my family's life. So I just wanted to illustrate their lives as fully as I possibly could. A real picture story to me is something that evolves over time. So anyway, that's how I got into it, and sure enough, within a year after I graduated, my parents had split up. They were both happier apart, and but I continued photographing them after that as well, but not as intensively because my family unit had broken up. Well, it had broken up and expanded with my stepmother's entry, and yeah, that's it.
Thank you.
Well, my dad was a professor and an advocate for people with disabilities, so I grew up with that. And my mother was a lawyer who worked at Greater Boston Legal Services while I was growing up. When I was 18, my dad had an accident and while playing squash, and became a quadriplegic. So this film happened years after my dad had passed away, and my mother no longer worked at legal services, but I heard the story of what had happened, and it was just really, I thought it was just an amazing story, and I met some of the people involved, and I approached the organizations with the idea because they had become issues that have become very important to me after living with them and watching my father navigate all sorts of areas, trying to find accessibility and fighting for accessibility. So I made a film about this story 10 years ago on my own, and then they approached me last year to make a follow-up film. So they had wanted to document what had happened and all the success they had had. So I went back and interviewed the same people and revisited the story with them.
Thank you.
Well, every Q&A I've done, I've always said the same thing. I always say, like, well, I was really heartbroken over a girl who broke up with me, and then Matt Hawkins, who is in the film at the end, he saw one of my other films, and he called me and he said, "I'd love for you to do this one." That's part of it. That's a huge part of it. But also, like, I grew up with, like, my mom has a disability too, and like, she was an occupational therapist, and so is my stepdad. So I've been around like disability and autism like my whole life, and just always had a huge heart for the underdog. And then, filmmaking came in and gave me a chance to glorify people with disabilities, I think, the way that they should. So that's
Thank you.
should be.
Yep. I think now I'm gonna ask one more question before we open the Q&A to the audience. We do have 2 mics on each side, so if you like, you can start thinking about your question and you can, line it up. So okay. So my question is, how was your relationship with the subject after you finished the film? And for David, how was the process when you pitched the idea to your parents and your family, and how did they felt?
My parents were very allergic to me making any requests for setting up or doing something over, and I didn't do that anyways because I just kept shooting everything candidly. So my relationship was that we were already comfortable around each other. I'd already taken pictures of my mom brushing her hair in her bedroom several times before that over the years. So when I took the picture that's at the very beginning of my video, it was just another picture. But I really knew that I was looking for the light and the positioning with her hands above her, up to her head. And so anyway, after the responses from the project were such that when I was a senior, my project was selected for an exhibition in the main photo gallery on the 2nd floor of the photo building on East 21st Street. And it was a huge honor, and I was very excited. It was 25 years ago. My cousin Phil Bauer is here. 25 years ago, he was at my reception. And I should also say that his father invented the modern microphone, right? Yes, Phil Bauer's father invented the microphone that we all depend upon. So my parents' response was they felt that my work was worth their patience. I went on to do more documentaries about blind people. I did TV programs for ABC News Nightline about blindness and blindness-related subjects. So they felt that I understood the issues correctly. They trusted me to explain the issues whenever I talk about it the right way. And so it was positive.
Thank you.
So what's the question?
How was your relationship after the project?
Great. I mean, I still communicate with them, and they're actively using this film to educate people about the project, about the settlement, and about what has been done, and to push forward because they're still fighting, or not fighting, but they're still trying to get more accessibility. And as Dan, one of the lawyers, said, there are cities all over the country and actually all over the world who are looking to them. So they're very active. I think they'll always be active. They'll always be activists. And yeah, I have a very good relationship with them. It was, they're easy. They want to talk about what they've done, and they want to let people know how they can do it too.
Thank you.
So my relationship with each individual person in my
And
film.
also, I was amazed how in your documentary that we see Olympic gymnast and the adorable Abel and all the amazing people. How do you get in touch with them?
All right. Well, as far as my relationships go, they're fine, I guess. Some are better than others. But the second question, how do I get in touch with them? Well, this film particularly, the guy in the beginning who breaks the windshield with his leg, prosthetic leg, he was talking to Matt after Matt asked me to do the film, and he said Ben, I'll give you like $5,000 to make this film. I was like, right on. And so that was cool. And he introduced me to Abel. He introduced me to Zach. He introduced me to Quinn. So he killed it. And then Elena came because Elena's good friend, Carolyn Odom, is Abel's godmother, and I met her, and she was like, "Oh man, like you gotta meet Elena." So I sent Elena like a temporary trailer on Facebook or something. I was like, Carolyn told me about you, and she wrote back, and she'd be like, "Yeah, I'd love to be in this film. I usually don't do films for free, but I really believe in this one." So that meant a lot to me. So, but that is exactly how I found all those people. Yeah.
Thank you. And do we have any questions from the audience?
Thank you. Thank you to the inspiring filmmakers for the work that you've done. We really are coming away with a lot. As we sit here in the Silas Theater, I want to acknowledge publicly, some of you may still remember, that Silas Rhodes, the founder of School of Visual Arts and the father of President David Rhodes, was always incredibly supportive to people with disabilities and hired many of them. During the late 1980s, he suffered a stroke and was himself disabled but bounced back from it, and as head of the SVA Press. And I'm a former employee of SVA from the 1980s. I'm now blind, legally blind at least. And I think David Rhodes, I'm so inspired by how he's kept up that legacy of supporting projects involving talented disabled people. The incredible talent here at SVA is really incredible and fantastic and inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to say briefly, I remember Silas Rhodes as well. He was a wonderful man and very kind to me personally. And he also hired Helen Buttfield, who was my most prominent instructor while I was a photography student here. Helen was blind in one eye, it turns out, but with her functioning eye, she was a master poet, and she was a brilliant photographer and illustrator. So I echo your praise of Silas Rhodes and David.
I think there's a gentleman over there.
All right. My question is, what projects are you three currently working on? Since I'm just rather curious about it.
Well, I'm doing a lot of different projects. I have a production company that where I'm working on a documentary about a program that called Green Up Our Schools that works on conservation and empowering kids, elementary kids, to become active in waste reduction and conservation in their schools and their communities. And I also am still writing and working on my on illustrating and short stories and things like that. But yeah, that's it.
Well, I'm 28 years old, and I just got my first full-time film job a week ago. So that's what I'm working. But yeah, I'm about 50-60% done with a new feature-length documentary, and it's about love, marriage, parenting, and sexuality within the disabled community. And yeah, I'm just super happy about it. And actually, the guy who's shooting this Q&A right now is my cinematographer for the movie, and he is an absolute legend. His name is Waylon Bell. And Waylon, I just want to publicly say that I love you.
I love you too, Ben.
And I always will.
The vast majority of my time now is spent as a realtor in partnership with my wife, Natalie, who's here and was my co-producer on this video. We work in Washington, D.C., and that's a job that consumes ungodly amounts of time. But I do have a commitment to finishing a book project, a documentary book about all of my photo essays about blindness that will be documentary photography with a Braille component. So it'll be a handicapped accessible book, a book that my dad could actually put his hands on and have something effective and to participate in as a reader. And other projects. I have wonderful ambition, but I've talked about them privately for a long time, but I'll just say it's more important to act on them. Over the years, you can accumulate a big drawer full of unfinished projects, and I've got a lot of them, but the book project is a real priority for me, and I'll say that for right now. I'm still making videos about photographers. My website has lots of them, and I'd hopefully get more of them onto broadcast television. That's a real commitment for me, is to continue to get these crafted photo essays and verbal storytelling onto television.
Thank you. This lady over there.
First of all, thank you so much. All the films were extremely powerful. What really moved me was in Tin Soldiers. I think Matt or Mike or one of the guys towards the end told that story of when he was in the supermarket, and he said that no one will ever understand disability if they don't see it. And he said that it's more rude if you don't ask. So I think these films are such a powerful platform for people to be able to see disability. And I was just wondering how you guys think that these films help change people's perceptions and negative stereotypes of disability, and what other means can help change these perceptions. Thank you.
I think that everyone should see their films, our films. Every time that the films are exhibited, they have an impact of positively impacting the audience. So, what do you?
I just think seeing people represent themselves. I think in We Will Ride, after the settlement, they created a department that specifically addressed accessibility, and I think like 75% of the people in that department have disabilities. And I think that it's so that I always find that the scene with in the conference room really powerful, because it's not other people making decisions for them. They're making decisions for them for their community, and they're very, not only qualified but probably more qualified than anyone else to do that. And I think anytime you can see people on the screen, out in the world, doing things, especially in Ben's film, where you see people doing things that a lot of people would never do. And that's how you create awareness. That's how people start, then you ask questions when you see people doing something that you are impressed with or inspired by, or just doing things that you didn't know they could do. I think that's how you kind of open the world up.
Well, so I guess that question, that's kind of getting answered for me with my new film, because my new film is it's a film about love, marriage, parenting, and sexuality. And to be honest with you, I don't think anybody without a disability, like a normal able-bodied person, can relate to the kid who does a backflip in a wheelchair, all right? But we can all, every human being can relate to love, marriage, parenting, and sexuality, whether it's they have it or lack thereof. So, it's just so important to be able to relate to people with disabilities, because that's how people with disabilities get seen as people who are just like everybody else, and I shouldn't say just like everybody else, because they're never going to be just like everybody else, but they deserve to be loved the same way as everybody else, and they deserve definitely to be treated the same way as everybody else. I think your film is really touching base on that, and so yeah, I mean, you know, I'm obviously proud of this one, but you know, like I've been kind of really feeling my new one because I just feel so much love headed towards the disability community's way, because I think people will finally be able to be like, for the first time, like, I swear, like, the word cripple or retarded, like words that have been used for so long because people are so like ignorant, you know, and those words are just, that's like, those words are, should never be, ever be spoken. Like, you know, it's just about, these are people, and they're just about as normal as it gets. They just were either born with a disability or it just happened later in life, you know? So that's the beauty of these films for me.
Thank you.
I think that's a great place to wrap up. I want to thank our filmmakers and WIGA this evening. Thank you all for coming. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.